I also appreciate Glenn of saying that even when Jesus tried to explain this to the disciples, they didn't get it. And so now me standing up to talk to you about it, goodness, if Jesus couldn't do it, why do I even bother? Plus, he said, no one knows the day or the hour, not even the Son, only the Father knows the day or the hour. So we won't talk about when it is that it is coming, but we will talk about our assurance that God is coming into our world. We talk about it in Advent as the coming of God in history, in mystery, and in majesty. History is what we celebrate the 2,000 years ago, like celebrating a birthday, and remembering that Jesus was a real, live human being like you and me, with feelings, with emotions, with a body that did all the things that bodies do. Up on our communion table this morning, there is a lone shepherd out in his field with one sheep, reading about the season of Advent this week. I read someone who said it certainly wouldn't have been in the deep midwinter because they wouldn't have had their sheep outside if it was the deep midwinter in the Holy Land, because the deep midwinter there is full of rain. So, anyhow, I suppose if you take your sheep out in the rain, do they shrink? Maybe not. But anyhow, Advent is this beginning of the church year, and it means arrival. That's the history part. The mystery part is that which we talk about in church all the time, the mystery of God coming into our hearts, the mystery that we can talk about but not explain, the mystery that we can see within one another as lives are changed, but that happens in God's time and at God's wisdom, majesty at the end of time, that we know that Christ the King is how this story ends. We know that there is an anchor way ahead in history where in the end, love wins. We don't know how far into the end it is. And so we wait. Like Duck, who was waiting for the other animals to show up for the Christmas celebration. Sometimes it's difficult to wait. Like Donkey, who wanted to hand the waiting over to someone else and ask Goat to do the waiting for him. Sometimes we realize that doing waiting for ourselves is the only way that it truly works. In this case, I don't know if you could hear, but Donkey was waiting for the pies to come out of the oven, and he left Goat in charge of that. And when the pies came out of the oven, Goat did what goats do and ate the pies, and the pie pans, and the tablecloths, and everything else that Goat could get his hand on or get his mouth on. Waiting is difficult. I've heard it said that you can't have someone else take a vacation for you. It just doesn't have the same effect on you. The same is true about waiting in our spiritual lives. We can't outsource it to somebody else. Say, oh, would you please go over there and do some prayers for me? Would you please go over there and do some works of mission for me? Would you please go over there and solve some conflicts for me? Would you please go over there and spend some time in quiet for me to still your soul? All these things that are parts of our spiritual discipline are things that we have to do ourselves. Now, the secular world would have us believe that 4 weeks of Advent is not nearly enough to accomplish all of the shopping, decorating, cooking, eating, gift giving, pie baking, and party going that is to be done. And the most traditional forms of Advent in the church might agree. This season started out being 6 weeks long, much like the season of Lent. It was a season of penitence, a season of looking back on one's own life, of seeing where it was that one needed to put things right with God, put things right with one another, and prepare room in one's heart for Christ to come. In our United Methodist Church, we follow a revised common lectionary, which just means that I don't get to choose what we're preaching on each week. And so these words from Isaiah and words from Matthew that come to us that even the Son cannot tell you what they mean are the ones that we read today. We read from the Gospel of Matthew. It's longer and more detailed than the account in Mark. It's also less scholarly and more distinctively Jewish than Luke. It has a lot of continuity with the Jewish traditions. In Isaiah, we heard about the beating of swords into plowshares. And in Matthew, we hear about the coming of God's reign. For what do we hope, according to Matthew? Today's reading gives us just a glimpse, a scene from near the end of Jesus' story. It's interesting that Advent doesn't have us starting with reading about Jesus being born as a baby, but on this first Sunday of Advent, reading from near the end of his ministry, when Jesus is trying to explain to the disciples that what they see now, that the destruction that they are about to witness is not all there is, but that he will come again. As we hear that reading from Matthew's gospel, we hear, perhaps with the disciples, the anxiety, the hunger for hope. Perhaps we read it knowing that crucifixion is not how we would like this story to end. And yet Jesus reminds them of the times when God saves God's people. Remember the times of Noah when the world was destroyed by the rising waters of a flood? One was taken. The one that was saved from the rising waters was in a boat that he had listened to God, that he had prepared. In a walk with some of the Boy Scouts of the Baden-Powell Council on Friday, we talked about how many churches look like a boat turned upside down as if to provide protection underneath. The arches look like the ribs of a boat. And there was a belief at one point in time that there was no salvation outside of this boat. I believe that Jesus gets out and walks on the water. The salvation is available both within the boat and outside of it, but reaching out to take his hand is required. This Gospel of Matthew was written down in a time of great unrest in the city or in the country of Judea. The occupying Roman troops had destroyed the Jewish temple in Jerusalem in about 70 AD, which is just before Matthew was actually written down. And so when we start at the end of the book, we are starting hearing the story from the perspective of people whose life and center of faith has been destroyed. The building, the temple, which took for so long to be built and then rebuilt, has been destroyed. It's as if the powers of the Roman Empire are winning. And it's in that situation that we hear that you don't know the day or the hour, but you must be waiting. You must not outsource the waiting to someone else, but you must be waiting for the day in which the Son of Man will come. In Isaiah, it talks about there being a high, high mountain, not just any mountain, but one that towers above other hills. And in the version by Eugene Peterson, it talks about the people not streaming to the mountain, but rivering to the mountain. I assume that Peterson means that they came in such large droves, people coming from all over, people rivering to find the mountain of the Lord. They don't just stream to it, they river to it. And in this, there is hope, not only in the numbers of people, but also, in my experience, most all of the time, whether it's a stream or a river, it doesn't go up mountains. In my experience, water runs downhill, My father would be so proud of me. He's a civil engineer. There is at least one place, however, and some of you may have visited there, where a river runs 2 different directions in each day. Have some of you visited at the Bay of Fundy? At high tide, when the St. John's River comes in to the city of St. John's, and the water from the sea pushes so hard as the tide rises that it reverses the flow of the river for 18 miles inland. The river is no longer flowing out into the ocean, but the ocean is flowing into the inland area. And then when the tide goes out, the river reverses and it flows to the sea for 18 miles. And every day, between those tides, when the tides are reversing, there is 20 minutes of stillness where the water is not flowing in either direction. I think that the season of Advent invites us to find in our own lives those moments of stillness, those times when, although it seems that parts of our lives are going out of control in one direction, or the promise of the Lord is going in a direction that seems so difficult for us to go, when water doesn't seem to run uphill, we remember in the stillness the promise of a new heaven and a new earth, of a God who does things far beyond anything that we can understand or explain. A mountain where all the peoples of the earth would find the instruction of the Lord. It's also in the Gospel of Matthew that Jesus preaches from the Sermon on the Mount. And I love that tie-in with Isaiah, that there is a way when the people are saying they receive instruction on the mountain, that God may teach us God's ways and we may walk in God's path. As we hear the sounds of Advent from the Old Testament, they're not necessarily the carol of the bells or any Christmas carol at all, but they're the sound of swords being beat into plowshares. Imagine the sound of the ironsmiths at work. Imagine the sound of a new world being built. And find that place of stillness in your own life where you may get a glimpse of the kingdom of God. Find a peace that you can carry into the world. And be for others a glimpse of a time when they do not learn war anymore. There is a sundial on the outside of your bulletin for knowing the signs and the times. There is a doomsday clock that is put out by a group called the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. It was founded in 1945 by Albert Einstein and J. Robert Oppenheimer and some of the University of Chicago scientists who helped develop the first atomic weapons in the Manhattan Project. This Bulletin of Atomic Scientists created the doomsday clock 2 years later, in 1947. They used the imagery of an apocalypse at midnight and the contemporary idiom of nuclear explosion as in a countdown to zero to convey what they felt were the threats to humanity and to the planet. This clock is set every year by the Bulletin Science and Security Board, in consultation with a board of sponsors, including several Nobel laureates. This clock has become a universally recognized indicator of the world's vulnerability to global catastrophe caused by man-made technologies. Most recently, it's been set to 89 seconds till midnight. There is not, however, a clock that tells us at what time will Christ come into your heart? At what time will peace fulfill not only your spirit, but the spirits of all humanity? At what time will many people come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways and that we may walk in his paths? For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." Let us walk together in the light of the Lord. Let us river together up the mountain of God. Amen.